budget and talk about all this stuff.
Three-year budget is still utilizing option one for the development of it. And council indicated that the core competencies of public safety, police, fire, public works take precedent over other service venues. Such the general fund funding for there will be no funding for library, museum, and nature center. That's moving forward beginning in the 11-12 budget. Three-year budget has an allocation of $3.8 million, once we talked a little earlier about from the quality of life capital reserves going towards the lane layoffs in the police department for 2011-12 and 12-13. Characteristics and guidelines for the multi-year budget. The budget process is no longer an annual event. We provide at least a couple times during the year some updates to that. Multiple year budget evolves year round. We make reasonable assumptions going forward, make modifications as more data is available, and it's a rolling budget. And what we develop on the three-year budget, we look at our four major funds, which are tax revenue related: general fund, refuse fund, debt service fund, and capital fund. Our general fund for the proposed budget is about $54.6 million, which was a 5.6% decrease from the current year. Going forward, 12-13 is another 5% reduction, and 13-14 is 2.8% reduction. Refuse fund was a 0.8% increase over the current year budget. Going forward, a 2.5% increase in 12-13 and a 2.9% increase in 13-14. Debt service fund is strictly based on our outstanding debt payments. We've scheduled those out so it stays right around that $3 million range throughout the life of the bonds. The capital fund, as you can see, really is taking some hits here. The current year budget is 6.7% less than the current year. The 2011-12 6.7% less than the current year budget. 12-13, 56.1% reduction. And then 13-14, 18.4% reduction. In totals, you could see in total are about 11-12 is 6.7% less than the current year budget. 12-13 or 19.1% less than 11-12, and 13-14, 4.8% less than 12-13. So we'll get into talk a little bit more about each of these major funds. Before we do that, we'll just take a look at the projected taxable value, what we think is going to happen. We adjust this every year based on our numbers, our assessing numbers, and Oakland County's assessment numbers, equalization numbers. But 2008 was our top taxable value level, and we're projecting, and the county I believe is projecting also a market recovery after 2014. And what this table shows is a 3% cap on taxable value increases from 2015 going forward. Kind of looking at that, I think the 3 is probably a little optimistic going for every year going out. Once again, you have Proposal A, which is tied to the CPI, and you also have the overall general market value of properties. But doing that, using a 3% increase beginning in 2015, it'll take until 2028 before we get back to the 2008 level. Of course, we don't hit the 3%, and it doesn't. And in 15 going forward, it's going to just push it out further than that. Three-year budget, looking at our millage requirements. In the proposed budget, we have a total millage rate of 9.49 mills. 2012-13, we're looking at 9.59 mills, which is a 0.10 mill increase, and that's in the refuse area. All the other millage rates stay the same. In 13-14, we're looking at 9.67%. And that's only a 0.08 increase, but you can see what's happening here, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, is with relation to debt and capital. Our debt service requirements, we're going to require that millage to go up 0.17 mils, and that's going to have to come from our capital fund. So, so in recap, the refuse fund millage rate reflects a 0.09% increase, 0.09 mil increase for 2011-12, 0.10 mil increase for 12-13, and 0.08 for 13-14. Looking at the average residential city taxes, and the average residential is projected to decrease from $96,775 taxable value in 2011-12 to $87,300 in 13-14. What that does, if you look up above there, what the average residential city taxes are, the average residential city taxes will go down $315 from 11-12 through 2013-14. I'm sorry, from 2008-9 through 2013-14 will go down $315 in taxes. Each year from 11-12 to 12-13, it's going down $36, the following year $38. Looking at the millage rates, refuse fund, once again, the orange is kind of going up each year. General operating is flat, the top line. General capital has stayed the same for 2 years out, and then it drops in 13-14. Debt service, the bottom line there stays the same, but it increases in 13-14. The average city taxes paid on an average residential home, it's going to go for 2011-12, it's roughly $148 of their taxes goes towards capital improvements. 2012-13, $141, and 2014, $118. Once again, that's based on our proposed millage rates. Over the 3-year period, the average residential home will pay $30 less for capital improvements. Taking a look at our general fund balance, this is our total fund balance. This chart depicts the cumulative result of excess revenues over or under expenditures in the general fund. And 2010, that's an actual audited number, $23.7 million. In 2000, for the 2011, we're estimating with this budget that'll go to 22.9. 2012 go to 20.8, and 2013 $20 million. This our fund balance is projected to continually decline from the 2010 levels. This is our total fund balance. Part of that is our unreserved, undesignated fund balance, and we'd like to what percentage it is of our budget. 2012-13, let me start off first of all with 2009-10, we were at $10.7 million, or 18.5% of our general fund budget. 2010-11, current year, we're estimating to come in at $10.1 million and stay at the same 18.5. Even though the dollar amount went down, our budget went down for next year. Following year, 11-12, looking at $9.3 million, or 17.9%. And then in 12-13, we're looking at $6.6 million, or 13.1%. So in 2012-13, we are projected to drop below our 15% benchmark. How we allocate our funds. See that police and streets are the only remaining departments that basically still have some future cuts. All the other departments have been cut. at this point and going forward. And you can see that the police department and streets show a little minor, police a major reduction, streets a minor reduction in 13-14. They have some more layoffs in that area. The other departments are pretty much the same with just a slight inflationary increase. They're down to their, basically their bottom levels. Looking at the personnel summary over the 3-year period. In addition to the decrease of 47 full-time positions in the current or the proposed 2011-12 budget, 2012-13 we have 17 full-time positions that will be eliminated, and all of those are in the police department. We held off to this point, and even with utilizing capital funds of $2.5 million, $2.3 million in the 12-13 budget, we still have 17 positions reduced in the police department. 13 of the 17 are sworn positions. 13-14 budget recap. We have 18 full-time positions, 14 in the police department, and 4 in public works. Of the 14 in the police, 12 are sworn positions. These cuts are what were called for basically in option 1. They do not replace the 4 positions that ICMA had recommended putting back into the budget over the next 3 years. So those 4 positions are not in, they're eliminated as it stands right now going forward for the next 3 years. And roughly those 4 positions would total around $460,000 that need to be put back in the budget. But right now the budget stands without those, without the ICMA recommendation. Full-time employees per 1,000 population. We continue to reduce the number of full-time positions, and by 2014 will be at 306 full-time employees, which is under 4 people per 1,000 population. So the expenditure highlights. Closing the library, museum, and nature center. There's no funding other than holding costs for those 3 operations going forward in the budget. Utilized $1.5 million from the in 2011-12, using $1.5 million in a capital fund to delay public safety layoffs. Notice in the current year, there are 11-12, there are no proposed layoffs or uniform positions in the police department. The actual budget was down $3.2 million or 5.6% from the current year budget, and return responsibility of winter maintenance on county roads to the Road Commission of Oakland County. To give you an idea what we spent on Oakland County winter maintenance, 2008-9 we spent $481,000, 2009-10 $255,500, and estimated for this current year about $314,000. Now, of course, we have to subtract off of that the roughly $250,000 that the county reimburses us for that work. Expenditure highlights for 12-13. It's a decrease of 2.7 or 4.9% from the 11-12 budget. Let's transfer $2.2 million from the capital fund to delay further layoffs in the public safety area, and a reduction of 17 full-time positions. Once again, all in the police department. 13-14 highlights. A decrease of $1.5 million or 2.9% reduction from 12-13 budget. Reappropriation of $2.7 million of fund balance. A reduction on your slide, it probably has 14, it should be 18. A reduction, I changed it here, a reduction of 18 full-time positions, 14 in the police, 4 in public works. and our unreserved, undesignated fund balance falls below the 15% threshold, about 13.1%, or about $6.6 million. Looking at refuse and recycling, once again, it has our proposed millage rates of 0.96 for 12, 106 for 13, and 1.14 for 14. Once again, tied to declining taxable values. The contractor service for those years has an increase of 2.3% in 12, 2.5% in 13, 2.9% in 14. That's figuring in the CPI adjustments and fuel escalator clauses that are in the contract. And other expenses remain fairly flat. And once again, we have a fund balance. This is a separate reporting fund, separate entity. It has a fund balance of only $108,000. Debt service fund, we have keep our 0.50 millage rate for 12 and 13. In 14, it goes to 0.67 or 7.17 mil increase. We're reducing the capital by that same amount. We're using our fund balance each of these years, and in 13, 14, the debt service fund balance will be exhausted also. So that's a reason why the increase is there. Part of the reason, other is declining taxable value, because the principal interest basically stays pretty much the same, a little over $3 million each year. Capital Projects Fund shows a millage rate of 1.53 for 12 and 13, and 1.36 for 14. That's the minus of the 0.17 mils that's going to debt service. In 13, 14, they will also exhaust their fund balance and still only provide about $9 million roughly for capital improvements in 13, 14. That will continue to, as the debt service requirements continue to increase for the next few years, that'll continually eat into beyond 14, reduce that millage rate even further to pay for debt service. Capital projects going out 3 years, current or proposed year, then going out 2 more years. Normally, what we'd like to do under fire vehicles, we're replacing 2 pumpers in 11, 12. Normally, we put away $500,000 each year. We're skipping 1 year there, and we're pushing it off to 13, 14. The local streets, you could see, has been reduced in 13 and 14 from our normal little over $3 million to $2.8 million. Sidewalks gone from $500,000 to $300,000 for 13 and 14. And the transfer to the general fund, that's gone in 13, 14. We were using it for these next 2 years, the remaining funds that were left, canceling those projects out. The trail system, civic center, and park development. Put together some new slides at the end here, and just to think, there are a lot of concerns moving forward, but these are some of the major concerns that I think that we're faced with going forward. Continued decline in our taxable value, the use of fund balance and other sources to balance our budget, the sustainability of operations with our reduced staff, reduced funds for infrastructure improvements, debt service millage rate requirements, and even though it's not part of our budget, they have the Troy Downtown Development Authority and their outstanding debt. Our projected decline in taxable value, you can see from this chart, we lost 1.8% in 2009, 12.7% in 2010, 8.3% for 2011. We're projecting a 7% reduction for 12, 5% reduction for 13, and a 5% reduction for 14. So basically, since 2009, we've seen a reduction each year in our taxable value. Another concern is the use of fund balance and other sources to balance the budget. And these are all numbers that are in our 3-year budget without any funding for the library, museum, or nature center. So in next year proposed budget, reappropriation of fund balance of $2.2 million, capital fund transfer in of $1.5 million, and use the budget stabilization fund of $300,000 for almost $4 million of non-operating revenue to balance that budget. 2012-13, we're only having about a little under $800,000 of reappropriation of fund balance. We have a much larger increase, a capital fund transfer of $2.2 million, and budget stabilization fund again of $300,000 for a total of $3.3 million. 13-14, we lose the capital fund transfers. That puts pressure on the general fund balance again. We're up to $2.7 million fund balance, $300,000 from the budget stabilization fund, almost $3 million. So you can see we're well over, well, except for last year, well over $3 million of non-operating funds that we have from one-time sources and so forth that are coming in there to balance the budget without the library, museum, or nature center. Now, below is our chart that we showed earlier, but just our percentage of fund balance, unreserved, undesignated fund balance, the percentage of the budget. And it continues to go down, but it drops in 13 to 13.1%, or $6.6 million. Sustainability of operations with reduced staff, it may be a little hard to read, but it's basically quotes taken from the ICMA report. In the first two quotes, they said that we, in our option 1, that we had the reductions we had in public works and parks were a little bit too much, so we put back those positions. We put back 5 positions in public works and 2 in parks, and those are included in the 11-12 budget and going forward. Budget also, reductions proposed in option 1 result in the staffing levels so low in some departments, such as purchasing, human resources, city clerk, that they will be unable to continue to provide the service at current levels. We're trying to work with what we have remaining in those departments by putting departments together, having back office staff try to assist in all areas, probably try to do some movement of different departments together to help out, but those are they're at the lowest they could be in those areas. And hopefully we could provide it. All the department directors are looking at their workloads, and especially as it comes July 1, and that may result in reducing hours that were open to the public, those type of things for those offices, for the assessing, treasury, city clerk's office. They may not be able, especially during election times and whatever, they may not be able to handle those type of loads. They may reduce their hours and open an hour later, close an hour earlier, whatever, so they can get caught up in their backlog of work that needs to be done. Also, full implementation of option 1, they said, ICMA said, cuts too deep into the police department, and it's recommended that 4 additional sworn officers be added to the final model. Right now, our budget going forward does not include replacing those 4 positions going forward. And I don't think that was not necessarily ours. It was the, I think, kind of consensus from council. We talked about not to put them in at this point, and early when the ICMA report was given. So not to say that we don't need the positions, but at this point, they're not in the budget. Reduced funds for infrastructure. Once again, looking at the capital millage rate, it stays the same for 12 and 13. It goes down to 1.36. The operating tax revenue goes from $6.6 million in 11-12 to 13-14 of $5.2 million. Below is what the average resident pays in taxes for capital improvements. Debt service millage requirements, projecting out to the end of our debt payments on the current bonds we have outstanding out to 22. Voters approved these bond issues, and at the time we had a 0.75 mil for debt service at the time. We got in very favorable rates at the time, that in 1999, where rates were really low, so forth, and we were able to lower that to 0.50 mils to cover the debt service. We put the 0.25 mils into the capital fund millage rate, and we reduced the debt service, knowing that, not anything legal requirements, but knowing that if we needed that money, that it would have to come back out of capital to pay for debt service going forward. Well, you could see that we're okay through 12, 13, next couple years at the 0.50 mils. 14, we are going to need 0.67 mils, which is that 17.17 mils we talked about. Then it goes to 0.83 mils, 0.87 mils for a couple years. Then it starts coming back down. In the last 2 years, we should be okay again back at the point, or not okay, with 0.75 mils. But there is a period for 14-15 through 2019-20, that we will be above the 0.75 mils probably if the taxable value goes along as projected. Next slide is a page from the DDA budget, 2011-12 budget, which the Downtown Development Authority approved at their last meeting last month. We'll be going to City Council in May. So this is their 5-year budget, and you can see from here they are really being hit in their capture taxable value in the commercial areas. And we are projecting that in 2013-14 they will not have enough funds to pay their debt. They are separate. All the debt for the DDA are revenue bonds from the DDA. There's no pledge of the city for that debt service. But we do have, in addition to this, we do have some bond reserve funds of $3.7 million that are required for coverage purposes, and that would cover us through 13-14. But 14-15, we are definitely in trouble in the DDA with those bonds. Once again, there is insurance on those bonds, but that's not to say that, and hopefully the insurance companies are still in business at that point. If it comes time, if it has to be collected on, but the insurance companies are going to come after someone to get the money. They're just not going to say, oh, well, we just lost $20 million. So the outstanding bonds, we have to, it's not a direct city responsibility, but it's something we have to keep in the back of our minds that do we want one of our entities, not our own, not the city entity, but one of our entities to default on the bond issue. We're looking at certain ways to go about that. We're looking at extending the life of the DDA. We're looking at other things, but even extending the life, unless there's a big improvement in the overall market, that's not really going to even help. So we have that to keep in mind also as we go forward and look at the budgets. Not a lot of pleasant news in the last few slides, but that pretty much covers the 3-year budget.
Questions from council on this section of the budget of 3 years? Well, John, as you were talking and indicating the highlights, I changed mine to lowlights on all of them because it really is depressing news. News that we expected, and it was predicted 2 years ago on a lot of our numbers, and they've come back to roost, haven't they? Anybody have any questions for John at this point on these things? No? If not, then there's some questions that council had. We had a couple of things that we wanted to discuss ourselves, not necessarily related to the questions that were asked ahead, but could be. We have a couple of things that we need to deal with and to figure out if we're going to deal with them in this budget, and that is what we're going to do about the 4 police officers, and if we were to replace those in the budget, where that money would come from. We had a proposal from Councilman Beltramini about something to do with library for 15 hours?
15 to 20 hours.
15 to 20 hours, and if we're going to do anything about that. If anyone else has any other proposals in regard to that. We have the information from our survey, which we had Target Insight do, that indicate the areas that the community wish to have increase in funds or something done. And it's very evident that certain things are desired, but it takes revenue to do that. I have spoken many times in regard to this. For example, when we go and a business is coming to town and we go and we greet them or do a ribbon cut or whatever, and for example at Automation Alley when they opened their International Business Center, I spoke about we're always grateful for business to invest in our community, and that the fact that they come here because they want to have the strong synergy with other businesses in the area. They're willing to put forth the capital because they see it as an investment in their future and that they're going to actually get the money back. And so I've begun to talk about citizens investing in their community to receive the kinds of things that they came here for. They have an investment in their home. Many people have done reinvestment because they've done improvements in their home or other things. They've tried to keep their home up. And if they're going to continue to receive services or even have services, for example, with the library and with the roads, they're going to have to do an investment in their own community and look at that as something that's going to benefit them in the long run. The numbers without that investment are very depressing, and as you can see, any type of revenue increase that we would receive, also the DDA would be getting their portion, which would help with that debt. But mainly, it's that we've had residents coming for 2 years talking about things that they want us to keep or want us to have, and we need to really deal with it. And so I think that's where we are at this point. It would be really great if we could have all of council, the entire council, be on board with some type of ballot proposals for November, because it would say to the community that we hear what you're saying, we realize that your tax bill has gone down over a period of years, but that we really, if you want to keep these things in place, we have to have your investment. I don't know if others would like to talk about this, but I certainly would. Councilman Howard?
Actually, I have some questions on this section, and with respect to page, looks like slide 54, you mentioned that the general fund, unreserved, undesignated fund balance is a percent of the budget, and then you mentioned the actual numbers, and you said that we were at 10.7 million at 2010, and we were going to be at 10.1 million in 2011. I guess I'm curious as to where that comes from in light of page 44 on the budget with your projected operating transfer and if that's still the projection.
Well, I thought it may be a question on fund balance. So I have a chart which lays out exactly how fund balance, what's happened for this year estimated and going into next year.
Thank you.
That's okay. Should be if you want to take a minute to look it over, this details exactly numbers in the budget and what will happen with proposed, estimated for this year, our estimated revenues. We'd start off, we have a known fund balance June 30, 2010 of $23.7 million. That's total fund balance. We have estimated revenues for 6/30/11 of $55.2 million, expenditures of almost $56 million for 11, which will give you then a fund balance of $22,919,000. The breakout of the $22,919,000 is, currently we have $480,000. This goes up a little bit each year, up or down a little bit. It's called non-spendable, which is for prepaid items and inventory, which is non-spendable funds you have. We have $3.2 million that's committed. That's the volunteer fire contribution and the subsequent year's budget allocation, reappropriation. Then we have unassigned $9.2 million, which gives you $10.1 million, which is unreserved and undesignated. We don't show, in the budget, we don't, when you reappropriate fund balance, you can show it as a revenue source for the budget, but you can't show it as an actual revenue, because if you look in your audit report, that number doesn't show up as a revenue. It's not a revenue. It's used to balance the budget for budget purposes. In the audit report, you're going to see that we're in this audit report that's going to come out in 11. If all this holds true, it's going to say you had about an $800,000 reduction in your fund balance because your revenues were less, $800,000 less than your expenditures for the year.
And that's consistent with what you gave us, I think, in February as far as projections.
Right. So that's basically how it works its way through. And it's complicated. You have to pull the numbers, because you say, well, why don't you just show the $2.4 million? Why don't you just show $800,000 of that as revenue in the current year, because that's what you need to balance your budget. But if you do that, you're still taking away. You're still using it. Right, you're still reducing that revenue. So in this way, we show it. This is how it's going to appear in the audit of expenditures over revenues by $800,000. And that works its way down to the 22.9. If you go to the next year, then we're assuming that we have a 22.9 total fund balance. We have revenues 52.4. We have expenditures of $54.6 million. That's going to reduce the fund balance down to $20.8 million. And then the breakdown of that, again, once keeping the non-spendable the same, keeping it committed, goes down, because now in that year you have $1 million for the volunteer fire, but you have $780,000 that you're reappropriating a fund balance to balance the following year's budget. So that is no longer available. That's committed. The assigned stays the same at $9.2 million, and your unassigned now drops down to 9.3 from the 10.1 to equal at $20.8 million. So I thought it is complicated. I thought this would be, if I could just rattle off all those numbers, no one would ever follow it. So this way, hopefully it's a little bit more explainable. But that's assuming, our estimates are based on estimate at this point, where we think we're going to end up this year and next year.
Well, I appreciate that. That's a big help.
And then the projections ahead then for 12-13, it's even less because you've indicated
So we
already on the chart.
need a $2.7 million, and that's why it really drops down to the $6 million. The 9.3 goes down to 6.6 million, because we're going to need 2.7 million for the 13-14 budget, which is committed and not available as fund balance. So that's kind of how it flows through here.
Following up on that, on the 3 years, as far as the projections for fund balance utilization, do we, what is the likelihood, that we're actually going to use all of that?
Hopefully we don't have to. We try to budget. That's why we budget revenues conservatively, and expenditures try to give as true picture as we can of what we think is going to happen. But whenever you use fund balance Like this year, we're using 800,000, we had 2.4, but we're using 800,000 of it at this point, estimating. We still have, another 2 months to go through and whatever happens. But hopefully we don't have to. But as things get tighter and tighter, it's probably maybe more realistic that you're going to be using a little bit more of that fund balance each year than you have in the past.
And then I wanted to ask a question about the DDA. The DDA, trust me, I'm just asking so we can get a
On the
handle
last-
on the possibilities.
on the
Not
last
necessarily
page.
what I want to do, but DDAs are allowed to assess taxes within their boundaries, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. What, from a standpoint of comparisons, I know that Clausen a few years back had an issue, I think it was Clausen, with their DDA having some obligations and they didn't have the revenue to support them. Do you recall what they ended up doing to
Sure.
solve that? 'Cause I know they had a tax increase too, that may have
Yeah,
helped.
I'm not sure what they did.
All right, another issue is with respect to the debt. Do we need to take that out of the capital? The debt levy, I think it's 2014 or 2015, when we had,
Point one,
does that need to come out of capital, or could that in theory just be a unilateral increase in that fund?
One way or the other, what's happening there is that, which I did not mention earlier, good question, because what happens is if you take the .17 mils out of your capital, you are reducing, we have 8.10 mils for operating and capital. If you take the .17 out of the capital portion, and we already took .7 out a few years ago, you have .24 mils a year under your 8.10 mils. So you could, without a vote, levy the .24 mils, and you wouldn't have to take it out of capital. You could either one of two things. You could either raise the millage because these are voted bond issues by the public, and they voted to pay whatever millage is required to pay for these, whatever it is. So it could go up. You could either increase that .17 and keep everything the same, or if you take it out of capital, you could just increase the capital back because you have the authorization to do it anyways. So, which would generate over, I have that number here. It's over $1 million. Close to $1 million. I think it's because there's .24 mils on over $4 billion in value.
Just to follow up on Mr. Horwalak's question on the DDA, DDA is allowed to levy an additional 2 mils maximum, and that requires city council approval.
And that was brought up at our last meeting too. That's one other option to look at the, and we're going to study that further. What the
And that would just be levied on those properties that are in the DDA.
correct.
Yes.
Another angle would be, can the DDA actually transfer that debt to the taxing entities, meaning the county, the city, and so on?
I'm not sure on that.
I mean, if the DDA itself were to disband, the debt lives on. And so what, I guess what I'm getting at is, does the DDA, at the end of the day, always have that debt?
It is that's a separate reporting entity. It's a separate entity, legal entity.
Right.
And the city does not have any responsibility for the debt, but we'd have to look into whether or not they could. I'm not sure if they could transfer that. The city, unfortunately, would still have a major bulk of that, or portion of that debt. But
I think we should ask Mrs. Bloom. I don't think the DDA can disband as long as they have debt. Do we know that fact?
Well, there are certain restrictions. If there is outstanding obligations, then there are a lot of restrictions that would be imposed.
And when do those bonds expire again?
2000, when the DDA expires, so 2018-19.
Yeah.
And most of that debt is, well, it's offered public. Community center is a large portion of that. Big Beaver Road improvements is a large portion. There's still a small piece of the parking structure there.
Somerset North.
Councilman Fleming?
Last meeting, we talked about labor negotiations, and just wondering what progress has been made there, because it sounds like the mayor's leaning toward talking about a millage increase, and I don't know how that's going to go if we don't have some concessions significantly from the labor force. I'm just wondering if anything transpired.
Yes. Brief recap, primarily for the sake of the audience, is that we already have concessions from the classified personnel, the exempt personnel, and the fire service staff officers. There was a vote for AFSCME. I don't know the results of that vote for a contract ratification on their end. If that is ratified, I'd like to have an executive session with City Council at the May 9th meeting to give an update essentially on all labor groups where we still have outstanding issues.
I'd like to see if council would like to start the library decision discussion this evening, because we only have 2 hours on the 9th. And it's my strong feeling that if we're going to do anything with an interim thing that we're going to do, we extended closing the library from May 1st till when we vote on the budget on May 16th. And it's my strong feeling that any kind of temporary keeping open of the library and should be tied to having a millage vote. And I'd like council to have a discussion with regard to that, because you folks can see the numbers here, and those numbers are without funding to the library at the present time. And yet we still get the pleas at every meeting about keep the library open. And so I think it's very incumbent upon council members to say exactly for themselves how they feel. I can say how I feel, but I'm only one of 7. And I'm looking at the data that came in from the survey, looking at the numbers on the budgets and the projections for funds. And so that's why I make these comments. And I don't do it lightly, because I know it's not an easy situation. It's just not an easy discussion even for us to have. But I think it's something that we need to do, and I don't want to wait till the 9th to do it. So would somebody else like to jump in?
Being a current library point person, the numbers are bad, and I've never disputed that fact. You all know that. My concern with your strategy, Mayor, is that I don't believe that either our anecdotal information that we obtain through the community conversations or the statistical survey shows us that this council can effectively put forth a millage increase. And that concerns me more, quite honestly, than making additional cuts in existing departments to fund a very small scale library. That's where I am with that. I don't dispute the fact that Troy's problem is not a management problem. It is a revenue problem. It is, you know, like I said, you've heard me say this before, my house is worth the same it was when I bought it 15 years ago. And so my taxes are less than they were 15 years ago. I pay my own tax bill, I know how much it is. So I know that this is a revenue problem. When you multiply that by 30,000 plus households, that $150, $200, even $300 over 5 years to a particular household has far less impact in most cases than that same amount of money multiplied 30,000 times plus the business community does to the services this city is able to offer. But to get that increase, we need to have the trust of the people, and I'm not sure that we are there yet. I think that the last month to 6 weeks, we gained great strides. But I am concerned that even by November, we cannot be there, and that's my greatest concern.
Anybody else?
Madam Mayor.
Mayor Pro Tem Kerwin?
And that goes directly to what we heard at every community conversation, which was a communications issue. There's no doubt that we've had a communications issue, and despite the fact that this council has asked for a strategy for communications, we have yet to see one. And I really would like to have seen one. I mean, at every council meeting, some good things happen. Yet that's not what goes out there, and that's a flaw. And I would, again, ask the manager to look at, the manager, you do have your own budget. Some good communication could come out about what is going on. But because in the vacuum of that kind of communication comes that cacophony which we hear out there. So one was the communication. There's no doubt that there's been a trust issue because there's been no other kind of thing except what? And however, I do agree with the mayor that over and over and over again we have heard, and I think I've done close to a dozen community conversations now, and I know that we've all done community conversations and had conversations with folks and phone calls and email and service clubs and wherever people have gone have heard. Whether it's reflected in the survey, people want a library and they want the real library. And your effort in the resolution, the idea you brought forward for us, Councilmember Beltramini, did bring it back to the table and caused us all, I think, to go home and do some true thought. And there's no doubt that it makes sense to have a bridge between the library we have now and whatever support there could be going forward. And I welcome that kind of a bridge. The 15-20 hour thing, I think we need to talk about in practicality of what that looks like. However, the folks that I talked about, and for my purposes, I would say a sooner rather than later approach to the finality of this whole thing. Do you want a library, a dedicated millage for a library? And people said, give us a clear choice and let us vote. And I would be in favor of a sooner the better. I could see pulling some funding. Again, this is a one-time use. It is a big decision to have that bridge of a library until folks can come out and express the support that they say they have for the library on a clean vote. However, this isn't something new. And I just want to say it this time, since it was 4 years ago that we had the revenues and expenditures thing. It's the exact same thing that was brought before the majority of this council 4 years ago, which says, generate revenues to reinvest in the community and to continue day-to-day operations at a level that people view as acceptable. And I think the thing that's come out over and over and over again is this is not acceptable. Where we're going, despite the fact that we're trying to be prudent and live within our means, we're not even living within our means. This is still deficit. It's deficit From when we started 4 years ago, it's deficit now. We are on the watch list. We can't cut our way out of this. It needs the support of the community. And to that case, in revenue. And the two things that came out over and over and over again, snow removal, tell me what it is, I'll pay for it. Safety matters in this community. Fix those roads and stop complaining about, well, it's this kind, it's that kind. Fix those roads. And put the library question out there. A clean library question, not befuddled with the operational piece. You know, all of this put in one basket and let us sort it out. Not this put in between what would an independent library, but for gosh sakes, just what that library that we had. What would that be? And let us vote on that. And I hear it over and over and over again. The noise that comes through, no doubt, comes from some of the stuff we just went through tonight. You know, thank you, Assistant Manager Lamorato. However, folks, still at the end of the day, and you can look on we have our Oakland Press reporter in the room, read a letter to the editor. If you just close those two golf courses, gosh darn it, that would do it. It's not even in the operational budget. It is not going to make a difference. We're looking at the operations of a resource that people value. Gosh darn it, let them vote on it. Let them vote on it cleanly with none of this other mess on there. And let them vote on it as soon as possible, which is August. And I would support and advocate for a millage for roads, getting it back to where they wanted, a millage for the library, and have a short-term bridge of the library we have now until people can have an opportunity to express the support that they've said that they have on those two. So those are my thoughts.
Anyone else? Councilman Slater?
Well, I'll say something, I guess. I haven't heard anything that I disagree with yet, but I think it's a matter of what should we do and how much. And I am completely in favor of having a library, and I think everybody else is here too. But I'm not in favor of not having a long-term solution to having a library. So the bridge makes sense to me, but not a $1.6 million bridge. I think what we have now is the minimum that we should have as a bridge. And I agree that somehow we have to have a consensus around this table. And I said it before and I'll say it again, 4-3 is not healthy. It's not healthy for this community. It's not healthy to try and get anything accomplished. And I think there needs to be compromise. And I think there needs to be discussions on both ends and come to a middle ground here. 1.9 is too much. 0 is not enough. So I would like to see some consensus tonight to bridge this library, and let's decide a long-term solution and how much. And maybe that's the discussion that we could have on the 9th. So I disagree that the survey said that there is no possibility for a millage. I disagree with that. And I think maybe on the 5th we'll get a better feeling of that from the survey takers. And I think they'll tell us that we have a chance as long as we come together. So I still think we need to talk, and I still think we need to come to some sort of a compromise that we all can live with. And I'm not just talking about the 7 of us. I'm talking about the community. So, that's my thoughts.
Anyone else? Councilwoman McGinnis?
I think this issue of trust has been an ongoing one since I got on council, and I think part of the problem that we experienced was that, unlike what you'll see on the ballot tomorrow, all over the place, with all of the cities in a position that we were in, November of 2009, when I first took a seat here, I think that, being first out of the box to address some of those issues that we've seen a lot of other communities address since then, in some way, maybe affected that trust, because there were a lot of people in the community that hadn't seen enough information. We didn't do a good enough job getting the information out to them, and quite frankly, maybe there were a lot of other fires that they were putting out at that time in their own lives or with their own employment or their own homes that were so much more important than something that they perhaps couldn't have tangibly seen yet. I think that as difficult as it's been, the amount of time that we've put in since then, and the millage elections, and the community conversations, and the 2 years worth of budget sessions, have brought it out there to the public. And I think everything that we've been doing builds that trust, provides more avenues for information. I feel like although there are quite a few people that are still thinking, perhaps not quite a few, I hope not quite a few, but a couple out there that think if we just sell the golf courses off, we'll be able to have a library. I'm sure that there are still people out there. But I think the number of people that may have thought something like that back in February of 2010 is dwindling. I mean, there are a lot more people that are involved. There are a lot more people that are seeking information. And there are a lot more people, like I think someone said just at public comment the other day, that knows us each by name to pick us out at the grocery. I guess that's a good thing, because that means that they're active and that they're involved and they're trying to seek out information. So I feel like we would almost be doing ourselves a disservice to get this far in what we've done over the last year and a half and stop now and say it's just not going to happen. Because some of those voices that are negative, or some of those voices that are providing information that is not quite right based on what we've seen and what I think we agree to, they're loud voices, and I don't want that to keep us from moving forward in the positive direction that I think we're making. I guess my question would be, in terms of building trust, we've all sat through 2 budget sessions, we've all received the documents, all the numbers. I think all of us probably have a pretty good handle on the information. So if there's something that's not right, or something that people disagree with, this is the venue to bring it up now and then have a conversation so we can perhaps move forward with a number that everyone agrees on. Or if there's something that's not right that's standing out to you in the budget documents that you think would be forcing people to make the wrong decision or assumption, this is the time to bring it up so that we can all have that discussion and we can all be dealing with the same information. But I think that everything that I've learned and that we've learned, at least within the first part of this year in terms of community conversations and the survey, and just interactions with the community, people coming to speak to us at city council meetings, is that the library is very important to them. So whatever we have to do as a group to give people the opportunity to have that service, we need to do. And I feel as though that group of informed people that have been coming forward and choosing to get involved have indicated that they want an opportunity to make that decision, an up and down decision. And what that means in the interim, if it's a reduced, logistically, I'm having a really hard time even imagining what a 15-hour reading room would look like. And I know that Ms. Russ has probably spent a considerable amount of time now that that option is out there talking about that, but we're dealing with people that are coming to us with it being reduced to 55 hours and absolutely freaking out because it's not acceptable. I think the concept of 15 hours, I personally can't even envision what that looks like. So considering that as an acceptable alternative is hard for me to do at this point. But I guess that's my opinion, and I figure out, I'm hoping that there's a way that we can come to some sort of consensus. I don't know what that means to everybody, or what information they need to even have that discussion.
Well, 15 hours could be 2 days of, one day at 8 hours and one day at 7. Could be 3 days at 5 hours a day. It could be 5 days open for 3 hours. And I don't think that our community finds that acceptable for their library. And I'm looking at, in front of me, all of the proposals that tomorrow other communities are going to vote on. It's going to be very telling what happens in those communities. Madison Heights has on a 1 mil levy for 10 years. They also have a millage restoration proposal because of the laws on limitation and their city charter millage authorization, reduced by the operation of the Headley Amendment. Funds for general operating funds. You've got Southfield, they've got 4 things on it. They've got 4.0581 mils for police, fire, and emergency medical services, 0.7066 mils for library, 0.0976 for parks and recreation, and 0.0560 for neighborhood street maintenance. These other committees are not afraid to put items on the ballot. I don't know why we should. And you know what? Brought the Friends bag to carry my budget in tonight because the real friends of the Troy Public Library want to have a real library. They don't want to have some small rinky-dink reading room. I think the real friends would rather see it closed, to tell you the truth, and then people would vote to say, yes, they want to have a real library. I think it's a travesty that people pretend to want a library and pretend to be friends of a library when they won't fund it, and it needs to be funded. And there's other things that need to happen in this community too, and it needs to be funded. And I am not going to put off the challenge of putting it forth now and let some other council do it. Why would we duck from this? Why did you spend all these years being on council and years being elected to council, time, energy, knowledge that you've learned, to put it off onto somebody else? I'll never do that. Yeah.
Mayor?
Councilman Howard?
In the spirit of cooperation, I'll try to temper my comments, but the point is that you cannot play Russian roulette with the services in this city. And so if you want a tax increase, it's not, in my opinion, it's not a responsible, I guess I'll tell her later, but it's not a responsible leadership for us to close something because we want to get a tax increase. If you want a tax increase, you need to structure the city so that people feel like they want to vote for a tax increase, not because they have to. It's always more enjoyable to do something because you want to wear it as opposed to you have to. We could all point fingers at each other and say, you were the one that closed the library. You were the one that closed the library. I don't even believe that we need to have 7 members to agree on things to move forward. But we need to do something, because I don't think the status quo is acceptable. The status quo, which is setting in motion closing the library here in a couple of weeks. As far as folks that don't want to have tax increases, I think we need I think we need to respect the opinion of each other, because I think if there were 7 of them around this table, they would find a different budget to bring forward that didn't include closing the library, but would include revenue or expenditure cuts in other areas. So I think that we just need to be able to respect each other's opinions, and whether that be that we want a tax increase or not. So I think those are things to keep in mind. But I do have a few questions. If I don't mind yielding the table and then coming back to them, but I do have a few questions that I think would help, and just I'll at least throw the bigger picture on the table, which is to follow up on Councilwoman Beltramini's proposal from, I think it was 2 weeks ago. The bigger picture is perhaps what kind of library can we have with a smaller budget than was budgeted in the 2011 fiscal year. And, it might not need to be 15 hours, it might be 48, I'm not sure. But if we can look at it from that perspective, then we can, because the library needs to remain open, and the question is, how can we all kind of compromise here to make that happen?
I guess if I may respond to a couple things. One thing, you said tax increase, and again, we're really talking about a millage increase. In point of fact, sometimes the millage increase doesn't equate to my spending anything more. I still sometimes can roll back. So I think in terms of speaking about this, we're talking about a millage increase. In some cases, it doesn't amount to any more of what I'm going to be spending. I'm still seeing my money roll back from what I used to spend. So in terms of what kind of library do we want, for looking at the bridge, I would still advocate for the kind of library that we have right now before I would start dropping to, well, how many hours or what would that look like, and give folks that opportunity to vote whether they want that kind of a library or not. That was what they acclaim. That's what we hear when we're out with the conversations. And the question that I think that would bear looking at before the next meeting is where that kind of money, even for the bridge, say to the August election, from where that would come in what we're looking at now. Something has to be cut. We're in deficit as it is. So funding a $4 million library within this current budget is unsustainable. It's unrealistic. We're trying to cut our way out of that. So I, again, would go to the folks to vote on that. He had a second question. I just responded to that.
What was your other question?
Oh no, I
Sorry.
just wanted to spark some discussion. Actually, I have some more technical questions, but I wanted to at least throw that out there. As far as I don't know that we need to be hard and fast on a 15-hour library.
The questions that I asked and the answers from Mrs. Russ, I think are very telling. If you look on your yellow sheets, it indicates that the current cost to operate the library, if you look on that, and to how much it would cost to operate for 1 quarter from July 1st to September 30th at the current funding levels, $671,250, and to operate for 2 quarters from July to December at current funding levels is $1,342,500. And that's the library that's open 55 hours a week, closed on Saturdays, reduced its hours. Programming has been eliminated, and the collection budget has been reduced by 45% over previous year's budgets. And a lot of people who go to the library to get materials want to get the current things. And they're already getting a reduced level, so they would get nothing at 15 hours. If it was in the library that was the award-winning library with a total budget in 2009, 2010, you have those figures here of how much it is. And that would be a library open 65 hours a week, including Saturdays, for 7-day-a-week operations. A full complement of programming was available to residents, and the collection budget was funded at levels comparable to other libraries of Troy Public Library size. And the crucial thing that we need to be making a decision about what we're going to do if we're going to do a bridge, is that people in this community want to know, should they go plunk down their $200 for a non-resident library card at libraries that will allow it so that they can get their materials, or will they do without, just go and read the stuff and not check it out, while they can have a vote? But I think this community deserves a vote, and a vote on a library that is within our budget. And other communities are doing it, some that never did it before, and I'm not saying that it's the same as what was on the ballot in November, put on by the Friends, because that was an independent library. This would be a library that would be within the budget with dedicated funds. Now, we have not done dedicated fund millages previous to this, except for bonding for certain projects in this community. We've never done it before, but I think maybe it's time to do it. I'd like to see staff come back with some information for the 9th, when we're going to have another discussion, but only for 2 hours, of what kind of a millage proposal would look like, you know, with wording that would be for library and for roads, and also for some kind of resolution, as Councilman Slater said, for what we're going to do for a bridge. Because if we're not going to have those discussions and stick with what we say we're going to do, then we might as well close the library, vote on the budget on May 16th, make everybody unhappy, you know, I know that's hard to say, but when we've only got so much fun in our purse, then we can only do so much, and we have to decide. And you see where the funds are going from now on. So it's not going to get any better, folks. It's only going to get worse. Councilman Slater? Oh,
Oh, that's easy to mix this up.
I'm sorry. Get your hand up, and I can hear your voice.
I suppose tonight we have a lot to be thankful for, looking in hindsight. We could be talking about closing a library that we just built for $32 million. That's what the council was considering here just a few short years ago. And it was a split council, and we decided not to do that. So that library didn't take place.
There was never a vote on...
This was announced at 2 State of the City meetings.
No, it
We
was
were gonna
never,
build it.
there was never a vote. I have to interrupt you because there
We
was
didn't
never a
vote
vote.
because we
No,
didn't get the support.
no, there was the suggestion by me at a State of the City that we needed a bigger library because it was asked for, but it never came up to council. We never had a vote.
It-
You check the record.
It never was voted, but it was certainly discussed and was brought up, I believe, at 2 State of the City addresses that I attended. So I'm thankful we don't have that. That's hindsight, because that's where some members of this council would have taken us at the time. You know, had there been support on the council for it, and discussion continued, we'd have built a new library. So I'm thankful we didn't have that. I think this entire council wants a library. What it looks like, is, people have different opinions of what it should be. I still think that we're going to have a difficult problem getting a millage passed in this environment, whether it be August or November, until this council continues to do the due diligence that we're doing, and I think we're going in the right direction. We're making cuts. We do have a revenue problem, but there's a huge portion of this community that thinks we still have expenditure issues. And part of it I've alluded to twice, and once tonight, was the negotiations that are currently ongoing with the labor staff, and some we've had received concessions on. I think until we get that finalized and that behind us and can communicate to the people in this community what we've done, along with a number of other good things that we've done, as far as taking cost out, I think we're going to have a really difficult time, I'll be honest with you. And I think even this council, in a small way, we can make concessions. We can cut our own council budget. We got a $55,000 budget. Come on, we could take a 10 or 20% cut that's nothing, but it's a step. We're asking other people to do it. Why doesn't this council take a 10% cut? Just take our budget, 10 or 20%, whatever, I'll do either one, right off the top. And we're asking other departments to take cuts, to take concessions and wages. I think we get that, because you look at the largest item in the budget is the police department by far. But everybody wants a safe city. We've got a safe city. We don't want to compromise that. But we would like to see some concessions. The majority of this community would. And if we can't get the concessions, we may have to accelerate the layoffs. That's where I see the discussion going with this council. But I think we are going the right direction. These things just take longer than we ever like and ever anticipate. But I think we're doing the right things. But until we get concessions and you've talked about communicating. Again, I agree. Clearly communicate what we've done. Demonstrate line item detail to the community in the paper, other methods of communicating. Then I think we can convince the community that, hey, we've done our due diligence. That's a term that's probably overused and not fully understood, but I think that's the direction we need to go. And when we get concessions, then demonstrate and identify and communicate everything we've done, we might have a chance. But now, I don't have a great deal of confidence that anything will pass in August or November, sitting here at the table tonight, without more cuts, more concessions, and expenditures.
Additional.
Additional. That's what I'm saying.
Just want to restate, if I may.
Yes.
That I've spoken to essentially every employee about the state of the city in terms of our financing and what we were looking for in terms of concessions. And it's my job to be concise because we have to produce something. And I've learned it's a lot easier to produce a street or a building than it is to produce a policy.
Yes.
But what I've told every employee group is that we're looking for 10% reduction, defined as the combination of base wage, pension, FICA, and workers' comp. It comes out to like 13 or 14% if you look at base wage only. Sometimes it's a little higher, sometimes not, depending on the group of the base wage that they have. I'm confident that by July we'll have something. We'll either make a decision to achieve 10% through concessions or look at another means to get that 10%. There's no privileged class of employees in the city of Troy. In terms of my earlier statement about having to be easier to produce a street than a policy, we don't want to be a bottleneck for your wrap-up discussion next week. And you spoke about some kind of a bridge to